What's going on, friends? The Milwaukee 8 was actually not the first 4-valve head on a big twin Harley-Davidson. Now, I'm not talking about the V-Rod or the Nova project. There actually was a time where you could go out and buy a 4-valve head and actually bolt it directly onto your Evolution engine. Now, just about everybody out there is very familiar with Feuling parts. Now, back in the 1980s, Jim Feuling actually came up with an ingenious design for a 4-valve head that would bolt directly onto the Evolution engine. Now, even later in the 2000s, another company actually picked this up and was actually developing a 4-valve bolt-on head for the twin-cam engines. Now, these kits were around for quite some time, and for the longest time, there's always been custom-made heads for the Evolution engine for drag racing purposes, but this was actually the first time the consumer could actually go out and buy a 4-valve head right off the shelf and bolt it onto the motorcycle with really not any other modifications needed. And honestly, just taking a otherwise stock Evo and bolting on a 4-valve head, getting rid of that old 2-valve head, you actually saw some pretty impressive gains on these motorcycles. So how much power could be made, and if it was so great, what happened to this 4-valve head and why did it go away? Guys, please don't forget, if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. The Feuling 4-valve head was very revolutionary in its own right, bolting this on to basically an otherwise stock Harley-Davidson Evolution engine with basically a set of drag pipes, S&S carburetor. These things were putting out 65 horsepower and 75 foot-pounds of torque. Now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you got to consider this is an Evolution engine with a stock cam in it, with nothing else more than pipes, a carburetor, air cleaner, basically a jet kit, and basically they adjusted the timing on it. 65 horse, 75 torque. That's pretty dang good. Now, with nothing more than a higher quality exhaust like a 2-in-1, and if you were to actually go out and put a camshaft into it as well, you were seeing gains of 80-90 horsepower and 100 foot-pounds of torque. That's quite a bit for an Evolution engine. Now, the design of this system was really ingenious. It had basically 2 intake runners that bolted into the intakes of the cylinder heads, and then it had a plenum that just slid right into the middle. Now, essentially what this did was you didn't have one carburetor feeding each cylinder, but what you did have was your main carburetor over on the right-hand side, which was basically utilized for cruising or idling. But if you got on the throttle and you went wide open throttle, the second carburetor acted basically like a vacuum secondary, which would open up and start pouring fuel into the engine to give you even more power. While this is a really trick setup, you're probably thinking with the 4-valve head, it probably sounded something more like the Milwaukee 8, but honestly, it really didn't sound too bad on the Evo engine. They still had a really good throaty lope to them. Now, even though this system sounded really good, it made a lot of power, it was very reliable, it just went away and it really didn't sell as well as you would think. The biggest drawback of this system was it just wasn't cost effective. It was very expensive and it really didn't make any more power that you could get out of an Evolution engine with a ported 2-valve head, high compression, camshaft, and maybe even a big bore kit. Now, these 4-valve head kits, they are pretty rare today. They are floating around out there, mostly used. Sometimes you get lucky and find some new old stock. I did happen to find one eBay listing for one, and it was a used one. It was all there, it was complete, but they were wanting $2,500 for it. Now, I don't know about you, but $2,500 is really steep for some used parts. Yes, it's trick, yes, it's neat, but $2,500 into an Evolution engine, that's going to make a lot of power right up there with what those 4-valve heads will make. Now, another part of the demise of this 4-valve head system was a lot of aftermarket companies started basically creating their own versions of them, and, well, let's just say it didn't go so well. Now, while the 4-valve heads flowed way more over the 2-valve heads, they also allowed for higher compression much more safely. The issue was that they started making changes to the valve train, and these changes that they were making to the valve train caused a lot of reliability and performance issues, and ultimately it led to a lot of failures. They started changing valves, swivel feet, rocker arm shims, trying all different kinds of things to build these things quicker and cheaper, and obviously with predictable results with all the failures. Now, in about 2008, it really looked like these 4-valve heads were going to make a comeback. A company called RPM Performance, Revolution Performance Motors. They started advertising their own version of a 4-valve head, and it was also going to be offered for a twin cam and the Evolution engine. Now, RPM Performance started advertising their Hemi head, which was basically a hemispherical combustion chamber, and no doubt this was based somewhat on Feuling's design, but they had kind of put their own little spin on it. And they really threw out there that it was going to be offered for the Evolution engine immediately, and they were still in testing phases for a bolt-on set for the twin cam. Now, there was a lot of hype surrounding these. RPM Performance claimed that they had different sets of heads to fit different bore sizes, and they also had complete engines that you could buy ready to go right off the shelf. Now, you got to think 2008 pricing here. They were pricing the Evolution heads right at about $3,000, and they were pricing the twin cam heads right at about $3,100, so just slightly more if you had a twin cam. Now, about $3,000 for just a set of heads, that's pretty expensive even in 2008. Heck, that's still expensive today. If they were trying to sell these today, I figure these things would probably cost roughly about $5,000 for a set. Now, don't get me wrong, they sounded pretty good. 15 to 20% gains, and you could also safely raise the compression from 9.1 to well over 11 to 1 without blowing it up or melting it down. Everything sounded great, it was looking good, the company claimed everything was being tested, proven, getting ready to go on sale, and then all of a sudden, nothing. The company shut down, and that was pretty much the last hurrah for a bolt-on 4-valve head for a twin cam or an Evolution engine. There really hasn't been anything come out since. It really was a neat concept. It had a lot of potential. The only problem was with it is it just wasn't cost effective for the average Harley-Davidson owner, especially considering the average owner could just go out and use the same basic formula with porting your 2-valve heads, big bore kit, high compression cam, and still come out just about right in the neighborhood and make the same power as you could with the 4-valve head. Now, that's not to say using that same common formula and pairing it with the 4-valve head wouldn't make a big difference, probably about 15 to 20%, 10 to 15 horsepower, but the problem is you're already going to spend another $3,000 on top of the $3,000 to $4,000 that you already put into the motor. And most of the time, that doesn't even really include the labor, especially when you're considering porting the heads. Now, these kits are pretty rare. I've always heard a lot about them over the years, but I personally have actually never seen a set on a street bike at a bike night out in the wild. Now, every now and again, you will see an eBay listing for a set of these, and you might even run across the set at a swap meet sometimes. If you do happen to find a set of them, if the fins are in good condition, they look good cosmetically, you can always have these cleaned up, have the valves lapped, get them rebuilt, and actually bolt them onto your Evolution engine and honestly have something that's truly unique that you don't see every day. But guys, let me know in the comments if you guys have ever seen an Evolution engine with the 4-valve heads on them, or even better, maybe you owned a motorcycle that had a set of these 4-valve heads on them. I'd love to hear your experience, so please share it in the comments. Well guys, that's all I've got for you this week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. But until next week guys, you stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars, and I'll catch you guys back here next week with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.